So I'm sure you didn't actually come here to hear me ramble. I'm sure you would much rather hear Cindy, Danette, and Liz talk. So please give a warm welcome as they will be speaking on CISO risk dumpster fires, SEC turns up the heat. So please give Liz, Danette, and Cindy a warm ShmooCon welcome.
Thank you. Wait. Oh, there it is. It is hot. So thank you. And not only is it hot, it's going to be spicy. So, I mean, what better way to kick off a talk about dumpster fires than with a warm welcome? I like the theme. Let's keep it going. So if anyone was paying attention to the news as 2023 is winding down, suddenly we start hearing about the SEC. But the SEC and cyber not just moving beyond a little bit the gossip that everyone's like, oh, okay, how is my shares doing? How's my portfolio doing? But suddenly we're seeing CISOs and other folks in the, let's call it food chain, getting dragged in, getting mentioned in complaints. Suddenly, basically, the heat is being turned up. So as we're noticing all these, we're going to call them dumpster fires, but really grab your marshmallows, grab your chocolate, grab your graham crackers. Let's make some s'mores out of this and figure out what's going on. And one of the best ways to do that is I invited a couple of friends. And so we're going to have a little bit of background, kind of share what's going on with, there we go. Provide a little bit of background on what we're talking about. So not just this abstract, but dive into 3 of the different hot takes. And then Danette is going to share a little bit about what are the rules, what are the regulations, what exactly are we, when we're talking about what is the background against which all this is happening. And then you can't really delve into a topic until you bring in someone who, with Cindy, as both an investor and an advisor and a board member, like what does this actually mean? So we hear this, we hear the hysteria, we hear the dumpster fires. So my name's LizWharton, and I'm an attorney, advisor, and executive, and brought along Danette. Danette is both an attorney and a former SEC prosecutor, because let's talk to her, let's get the inside skinny. And then Cindy as both a board executive, advisor, and investor. So let's round it out. We're gonna have a conversation, like I said, amongst friends. And while there may be some lawyers up here on stage, we are not necessarily your lawyers. And we are not definitely not giving legal advice. So keep that in mind. We represent no one but our own thoughts, opinions. And while there may be 99 fires, a breach is one. So let's talk about, Let's talk about what happened with MGM and Caesars, where you have, for the first time, you had 2 giant casino hospitality companies, and they had same threat actor, same kind of incident. One of the first times we saw people having to file the 8K, basically file with the SEC and disclose what exactly was going on. What I thought was interesting about this and why it was kind of a little bit of a dumpster fire is one paid the ransom, one didn't. One had 100 million in estimated losses that they publicly disclosed. One had significantly less. But if you look at their 8K filings, where they have to kind of open up within 4 days of discovering the breach, and materiality, and Danette's going to go into all that, the one who had the fewer losses, the fewer, like some would say fewer impact, their 8K looked like they threw up on the page. It's going. If you're looking at the slides, you'll notice that one of those has like 3 sentences. That was all they were going to tell you. Those are the ones who had 100 million in losses. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, fascinating. Well, that's one of the ones we're going to get into, but also what happens when misstatements, omissions, and schemes. So what happens when the SEC files against both the company, but also the CISO? And where we really wanted to talk about with that is, okay, yeah, blah, 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 someone didn't have good security practices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But a kind reminder to everyone, put nothing in writing that you don't expect or aren't prepared to see read in a deposition, or in this case, a complaint filed by the SEC against you. For example, coming back and telling your colleagues that, well, I lied, in writing, those internal communications are suddenly popping up. So what happens to that? What happens when the SEC is looking back and saying, oh, those internal presentations you were giving for years leading up to the actual incident at issue here, oh, we've been paying attention, we're gonna bring those in. So if you're advising your CISO, if you're a junior analyst going, oh crap, everything's on fire, this is a dumpster fire, maybe let's be a little more intentional with our language, but we're gonna get into that too. But we thought, okay, all right, so we've got this. So now we have to worry about what we're saying publicly, what we're saying privately, and then what happens when, well, we're not even the ones saying it, but for one of the first times ever, what happens when the threat actor snitches on you, the victim, and files a complaint with and reports you to the SEC? So now we're gonna get into the meaning of, well, what is material? What is this? And so with some of the rules that came into place that, and Danette will dive into, and I'm gonna give a slight tease for what she's gonna talk about, is nothing really changed, but it did, but it didn't. But what happens when you don't pay the ransom within 24 hours and, oh, I don't know, poor Meridian Link, suddenly they've got these reports being filed. It's like, yeah, no, they didn't respond. We like a petulant child, the threat actor says, we didn't like how they did it, so we're just gonna totally rat you out and put it out there. Well, what does that all mean? So with that, Danette, we're gonna switch seats. She's gonna give you a little bit of background because I think that's a little bit of spice for us to talk about this morning.
For the record, I don't have slides, so I'm not gonna change seats.
She's just already in the hot seat as a board member.
All right, thanks, Liz. Great to be here. Sure. Is that better? Yeah, keep doing it even more. All right. All right, thanks. So great to be here. Again, my name is DanetteEdwards. It's my first con, so please go easy on me. Thank you. Thanks, you're kind. I heard you don't play Spot the Fed here. If you did, I don't think I count anymore because about a year ago, I left the SEC's Enforcement Division. I became a defense attorney at the law firm of Katten, Much and Roseman. There, I chaired the Securities Enforcement Defense practice. That's a mouthful. Prior to that, I spent 12 years in the Enforcement Division at the SEC. I prosecuted all manner of cases, accounting fraud, offering frauds, big Ponzi schemes, insider trading, misconduct by auditors, and the like, you name it, it probably crossed my desk, and I investigated and charged it. Most of my cases had a parallel criminal case that brought or trucked alongside of mine, and DOJ brought charges as well. So I worked with Maine Justice and various U.S. attorneys' offices and the FBI for most of the last 12 years.
Danette, what was your first case out of law school?
Enron. Criminal defense. I'm dating myself. Thank you. Yeah, 2002. So that was really the heyday, and I represented Ken Rice, who was co-CEO of Enron Broadband Services.
Just wanted to make sure you knew who was on stage here, so.
Thank you.
We bring nothing but the spice.
So, okay. I just want to do a little bit of level setting in terms of what the SEC does, what its role is, including with respect to cybersecurity. So essentially a mini SEC 101 class. If it's old hat to you, I'm sorry, but I think it'll help for some in the audience who have heard about the SEC but aren't familiar with the agency and the daily workings. It's a large federal agency, but among large agencies, it's pretty small, especially when you consider what its role is. That's to police the entire U.S. capital markets. The SEC has a three-part mission. It protects investors, it promotes efficient markets, and it facilitates capital formation. The expertise at the SEC is divided among divisions. There's the SEC's org chart. The largest division by far is enforcement. It's largest in terms of headcount and budget. Let's see. The SEC also has rulemaking functions, and I'll get into the SEC cybersecurity rules shortly, whereby it adopts rules that companies have to comply with or else face enforcement consequences. And again, that includes cybersecurity disclosure rules. Cybersecurity is a top SEC enforcement priority. The division has a specialized cyber unit now. That was established in 2017. It's got substantial cyber expertise. It focuses on violations involving cyber controls, issuer disclosures of cyber incidents, trading on the basis of hacked information, cyber manipulations like account takeovers, and market manipulations using social media platforms, plus digital assets and ICOs. So I think it's safe to say it has a pretty broad portfolio. It's actually called the Cyber and Crypto Assets Unit, CACU. It's not a great acronym, but it's got a lot of responsibility. As you may have heard, in July of this past year, the SEC passed final cybersecurity rules for publicly traded companies. It requires those companies to disclose material cybersecurity incidents on something called a Form 8K. That is a form that is used to report extraordinary events in between quarterly and annual reporting, so in between the Qs and the Ks that companies file. They also, these cybersecurity rules also require companies to disclose annually material information about their cybersecurity risk management, strategy, and governance. That requires a description of the board's oversight, as well as management's role in managing cybersecurity risk. Although not bound by SEC rules, privately held companies are probably going to look to these rules as a guide to their own practices. That's Gary Gensler, for those of you who don't know him. That's the person who's pictured on the slide right there. I have a slide about the New York DFS regulation. It's broader in terms of the companies who are required to comply with it, but I just put it up here for contrast because we've got two important regimes here now. So New York passed cyber security rules, the SEC passed cybersecurity rules, and I think the important point is some companies are bound by both. And sometimes, and in many cases actually, the SEC and New York rules diverge. And when you have that, especially if you're in an investigation situation or a breach notice situation, you want to make sure you're complying with both regulators' rules. And it's important to get good counsel to help advise you so that you are staying compliant with both regimes.
And Dan, DFS is?
Department of Financial Services. So, a little bit more about SEC sticks, carrots, and weapons. Let's see.
Now it's getting spicy.
Yeah. So, how do SEC investigations actually work? Enforcement staff like me often opens an investigation on the basis of a tip, often from the public. SEC can then compel witnesses to testify. They issue subpoenas, and they say, we can make you sit in a chair and talk to me for as long as I want. You can subpoena companies for documents and information, and SEC investigations are usually conducted in private. In fact, they're always conducted in private. But once the SEC brings charges, those become public. The SEC is a civil law enforcement agency. They do not have criminal law enforcement authority, but it works closely, as I said, with criminal law enforcement counterparts. So by cooperating with other agencies, the SEC can, in fact, literally and metaphorically throw the book at you. So,
Yo, give me that.
Badunks.
Where's the CISO out there?
Oh,
Throw a book at you.
Cindy's aim is just like the SEC.
And if you need, a
gonna hit
good
anybody.
lawyer, if anybody needs a good lawyer here, I do know. All right. So, parallel case. That's what happened on this slide. This slide shows an example of a parallel SEC and DOJ case. This was the Iconics case. It was brought a couple years ago. It was an accounting fraud case. It's near and dear to my heart. That's why I picked this one, because it was my case. The SEC brought charges. The SDNY also brought charges against a number of individuals, multiple individuals. Jay-Z is on this slide because we had to go to court to get an order for him to testify in the investigation. And when you make the SEC go to court to order you to testify because you don't want to sit in the chair, that fact alone becomes public. And in fact, There's a publicly available affidavit. It's my affidavit outlining why he needed to testify to the SEC. Correspondence between myself and his attorneys are all publicly available as part of the subpoena enforcement package. If you're on this receiving end of an SEC subpoena, I think you might feel like Jay-Z did when he wrote the lyrics that are there on the slide. Those are lyrics from 2 of his songs, and he dropped those songs about 2 weeks after he testified in my case. SEC had a banner year last year, so the enforcement program is going strong. There are no signs indicating that they will slow down their enforcement program in 2024. This is deep dive stuff. For anybody who is interested, you can go check it out. It's part of the SEC's enforcement annual report. It breaks down the types of cases that they brought by category last year. Since we're talking about sticks and weapons, the SEC can obtain orders for monetary judgments. Last year, they obtained orders for about $5 billion in financial remedies. They also pursue individuals quite often. So individual accountability is a pillar of the SEC's enforcement program. About 2/3 of the SEC's cases last year alone involved charges against 1 or more individuals. It's not just companies, folks. So carrots. SEC has a whistleblower bounty program. This is not like a bug bounty program like you're thinking of. So this is a program whereby the SEC can make payments to a whistleblower who comes forward and reports violations of the federal securities laws. That can intersect with cybersecurity violations.
So how is that not like a bug bounty?
Well, I guess it's similar, right? It's people who are maybe reporting vulnerabilities. So yes, you're right. Fair enough. But here it's not just, vulnerabilities, it's all kinds of securities law violations.
Vulnerabilities, shenanigans, all those things.
Yep, that's right. So last year, and they're building momentum. They've had banner years the past couple of years. Last year, the SEC's whistleblower program broke all sorts of records. They had the most tips filed ever. I think it's over 40,000 tips, complaints, and referrals. Those are not all whistleblower complaints in the capital W sense. About 18,000 of those 40,000 tips were whistleblower programs. So tips that somebody submits and says, yeah, I want to be considered for a whistleblower payment. You can submit anonymously, or you can be out in the open and say, please consider me for a bounty payment.
But make sure they don't find that you're behind that, because guess what? That doesn't count.
You're right. Sometimes. They do actually pay out to people with unclean hands sometimes, but if you have some involvement in misconduct, they might reduce your award
When we say
commensurately.
some involvement, what do we mean by all the involvement?
That might be disqualifying.
That's a tease for in a second.
The SEC is pretty serious about its whistleblower program and making sure that companies, including privately held companies, not just publicly held companies, take no steps to impede someone's ability to communicate with the SEC or file a whistleblower tip. So last year, it brought some pretty high-profile cases, at least in my world, where they sued privately held companies for having policies in place and termination agreements, separation agreements, things of that nature, with clauses in there that effectively put a gag order on departing employees and said you can't go, file any complaints with the SEC. The SEC takes, not surprisingly, a pretty dim view of policies like that. So I think, it's wise for companies of all stripes, not just public companies, to maybe do a policy review and make sure there's nothing in there that the SEC could later say you were actually impeding someone's ability to come talk to us and report wrongdoing.
Or as a CISO, as you're negotiating some of your employment documents, pay attention. Make sure that as you're leaving that you are fully aware that there's nothing they can do to prohibit you from sharing some of the information you may have.
And if you're responsible for reading your insurance policies, also make sure that the insurance policies are not trying to put something in there impeding your ability to disclose to the government.
So next few slides just have a couple predictions for 2024. It should say 2024 and beyond because some of the things I'm going to forecast here I think have staying power. It's not just going to be a trend that we see in the next year. I think these trends will be with us for the foreseeable future. We're going to see a lot of initial 8K reports and then probably multiple reports reporting on the same cyber hacks. We'll see corrective 8K reports because as everybody I think knows, when you experience an incident, the impacts of that incident often become clearer over time, such that you will have to, every subsequent quarter, or actually in between quarters, report more information about an incident or a breach to the market. So I've got some example on the slide here. It's one of Clorox's 8Ks reporting on an attack that happened last summer. And this is just one of multiple 8Ks Clorox had to file about an attack. So I think we'll see a lot of that. That's the prediction, multiple 8Ks when the impacts become clearer over time.
I say, as the IR team, as you're going through and identifying different things, because keeping in mind, these are filed within 4 days of determining its material. So as we all know, it's changing hour by hour when you're dealing with an incident, and you're still knee-deep in the response 4 days in. You've identified, oh, shoot, our dumpster's on fire. But you haven't even figured out what materials necessarily are in the dumpster as it's burning. And so you've got to start reporting, so seeing that shift and then like, oh, we thought it was this, but no, it was that. And so being able to update those. So again, just kind of paying attention and knowing that as stuff ebbs and flows, public companies are going to have to update that.
And it's also a great way to make sure you're not needing to do this by telling your executive management team that it's not just the 4-day reporting after the incident, then there's follow-on reporting and continual reporting and follow-on reporting. So again, hopefully it's a tool to convince people to avoid this impact to your company, another way to maybe get some more funding or backing or really make sure you're sparing the interest in making to avoid this in the first place.
So here's the next prediction. We're going to see more fraud cases against public companies and employees at public companies involving cybersecurity vulnerabilities and disclosures, a la SolarWinds, and the case against SolarWinds CISO. I think we're going to see more subpoenas to third-party service providers. So you can think anybody who holds, you can be a privately held company, but if you hold sensitive data and you are hacked, and those kinds of companies are magnets for hacks. You can law firms, accounting firms, organizations like that. But I think we're going to see more hacks of those organizations and then subpoenas by the SEC poking around saying we need to know more about that hack. An example was another law firm in town. They were hacked. Information was stolen related to 300 some firm clients. The SEC came knocking and said, give us the identities of those clients because, and this is what I thought was really important about this, the SEC's stated rationale for wanting the information about the clients was it wanted to see if there was insider trading. So we're going to see more insider trading investigations. So this sort of intersection between insider trading and cyber incidents like hack-to-trade cases. And they also wanted to check and see whether companies who were firm clients, who were probably public companies, made proper disclosure about the hacks. So there's an interest here in policing disclosures. Are companies appropriately disclosing when their information is taken? Whole of government approach, that's one of my next predictions. This has been a trend we've seen in the past couple years. We're seeing multiple agency cases. When I first joined the SEC 12 years ago, so again, right, I've been on both sides of the table. I keep switching sides. But 12 years ago, there was this policy in the government, probably unwritten, but it was against piling on. So one regulator was enough. One fire, we were talking about fires, right? One ranger, and that was it. But in recent years, in the white-collar space especially, and that includes cyber cases, we're seeing triple agency cases. We're seeing SEC, DOJ, CFTC, FTC. That's all possible. And I think we're going to see more of those. Everybody wants to get a pound of flesh. We'll see more cases focused on the protection of sensitive financial information and PII. So the SEC has something called the safeguards rule. They have red flags enforcement where they're concerned about people's identity theft programs. And when there are breaches there, the SEC, I think, is going to pretty aggressively go after them. And then I think, putting aside SEC, whenever you see more disclosure of incidents, we're going to see stock prices fall inevitably. When that happens, the plaintiffs' bar is going to take notice and file suit, and they too will file class action suits. There's going to be more shareholder litigation. I had to just put this one up here. This is sort of in the news a couple days ago. Just a couple days ago, the SEC's Twitter account got hacked. Everybody probably heard about that. I guess the SEC sort of gave us the prediction here. They said after the hack, the SEC is going to work with law enforcement counterparts across the government to investigate this matter and determine appropriate next steps relating to both the unauthorized access here and any related misconduct. So I think it's fair to say that the SEC is going to investigate this, and this is not the end of the story. We may see actors held accountable, particularly if they engaged in any trading or made profits related to the spike in the price of Bitcoin.
So and that's, I was going to say, and that's something, Cindy, like with the stuff is you're advising companies and they're setting up and picking their vendors and setting up the accounts and doing things. How's that going to change the conversation?
Well, again, I apologize if I overstate how much I like to look at our industry and look at healthcare from a point of view of what healthcare has done in order to try to confirm or make people aware. So previously, it was the medical field. And the medical field was, somebody else. You get sick, doctor go, and you get fixed by the doctor. But they pivoted to healthcare. And when they pivoted to healthcare, everybody started wearing Fitbits. Oh, I can take personal responsibility for my health. I should eat better. I should exercise. And then look at the term wellness. Wellness is only 10 to 15 years old. And look at all the companies out there chasing wellness and even changing the mental state of people in the population to want to be healthier. I think as an industry, we are not telling people why we're doing all of this. I like to call it data care. Because when we tell people why we're doing all of this and we're there to protect their data, we can also invite and tell them, you have a personal responsibility to protect any data that you have. We've seen all these data lakes, all this vacuuming up of data, people holding data. There's no reason to hold my data that's 7 years old, but people still are. So as a population, we need to get people to understand we have a personal responsibility for this data. Third party. Insurance companies or lawyers or anybody else that says, you need to give me this information, I would go back, what are you doing to protect that information? How am I sure that you're protecting my information when you get it? And so when you're talking about the why, I think it's an easier conversation to interrogate and actually request that information as saying, great, you need my information? Lawyer, what are you doing, especially in this crowd? What are you doing to protect my data? And there needs to be that conversation and that exchange. So it will change the conversation. It should change the conversation. But because we've been talking so technical and so what, people aren't listening or not understanding that they have the responsibility. If you demand information from me, then I'm demanding you keep that safe and secure as much as I'm required to.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically starting to hold the vendors that you're working with a little more accountable, knowing that failure to do so, it's moved from just this esoteric, like, oh, bad vendor, you're not, you're just checking the box, but moving it to, hey, because if this goes sideways, it's not just, oh, we had a data breach, oh, this is bad, our stock price is going to go down. It's suddenly your name is going to end up in some of the complaints that you are going to be personally start being held responsible. And I think that's where some of the shift too that we're seeing coming out of 2023. So it's not just the board that's suddenly worried about the other investors. It's, hi, I just saw my text messages, Slack messages pop into this because Danette's former colleagues are just like, hey, wait, no. That's interesting. You called it a dumpster fire in writing on the company Slack. maybe it is a dumpster fire, maybe it was your dumpster fire and you forgot to push the vendors, or you forgot to do, or maybe you pushed and nobody responded.
And the more evidence the SEC can marshal of
Get up on the
statements
microphone.
like that,
Get up
this
on
is a dumpster fire.
Come up on the microphone.
Yeah, I think you guys can hear, right? But the more,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, okay.
Yes.
All right. But the more evidence the SEC can marshal of statements like that this is a dumpster fire, we've got more of those. The SEC will say, well, these are accumulating red flags. That's a term it used in the SolarWinds complaint. And they said, look, we've got accumulating red flags here, and there's more and more evidence. And so in hindsight, they can look at that and say, yeah, look, I think there's a pattern here, and it may be indicative of intent, actually, not just negligence.
And so for that point of view, and knowing that a lot of us are now remote and we don't have the water cooler to have those, hey, you know what, this is really kind of a dumpster fire, ha, 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 they can hear my sarcasm and everything, and you put that in a text or a chat without context of this is sarcasm or this is, just a joke-ish type thing, they read that specifically, you knew and didn't make a change. So you really make sure that when you write things, it's intentionally written in a way that third-party oversight would read it the way you intended.
Yeah, I mean, starting off and putting in to your colleagues, well, I lied, when you're coming out of a meeting. And also, I mean, that just doesn't look good. It's, what is the joke? Assume every email is going to be read either by your mother or in a deposition, or in this case, an SEC complaint. And it's shifting that water cooler talk. Since we're not necessarily in offices, it's making sure that you're not necessarily putting it in writing, and context gets lost in the meme that you sent your colleagues because you thought it was hilarious. That context has been lost, and could it be read a different way? Like putting sarcasm in air quotes after something doesn't necessarily read well.
And the regulators don't always have a great sense of humor.
Always, any. So, also as CISO, so we have also been hearing lots of people don't want that position because of this oversight and because of all of these traps that you don't even know are ahead of time. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation, because I want great people who are capable to be CISOs. Please don't walk away from that position. Please step up and do that. However, what I'm telling you is when you walk up with your budget and you say, hey, I would like this because I've identified this hole or this weakness that we have, and the CEO or whoever says no, oh, can I get that in writing? When you go to HR and HR says, oh yeah, you know what? I've had all of this cybersecurity awareness ready, but HR hasn't rolled it out. Can I get that in writing? So from a point of view, it's kind of like taking the eye of Sauron off of you and maybe divert it somewhere else and kind of say, hey, I've been doing my job. I have been attempting to do my job, but I have not been able to get the company to move forward, which also, I think data care and making people understand the why of what you're doing actually is beneficial. The other piece on that is the position of CISO from a point of view, who do you report to? Like from a standpoint, the SEC probably assumes all CISOs report right to the CEO and they have their ear and there's likely some strategies they report to the CIO, the CEO, the COO, maybe not even. So again, if you give somebody that chief title, understand the outside looks at it as a chief title, not a director of, not a vice president of. If your organization, you're truly a director of or a vice president of, that should be your title and not the CISO from a point of view, because and in the event that you do have that, you should either insist to directly report to the CEO or at a minimum, make sure that the company's DEO and EEO insurance covers your position specifically and work through whatever that is in order to make that happen. And if you have a question, there's actually 2 microphones. Just because I keep looking at you and, yeah. And I know we have a question over here too, but so just please don't leave the thing. Look at the traps. Listen to what has happened to other people in front of you. You already have a threat feed regarding what has happened to other companies, and it's called the 8Ks. Anytime. You should have a threat feed reading 8Ks because you're going to learn a ton of information about how somebody else has either been impacted and how the SEC or exterior reacted to that. And it should help inform what you're needing to do. So it'll help you look for the traps. Again, whatever you can do to take that eye of Sauron off of you so you can continue to throw the ring in the fire, to put out whatever you need to do, that's important. So please, even though it seems like there's onerous, please don't leave that because it's so important for you to, make your journey and destroy that ring.
Well, and I think, too, one of the things that this activity and predicted continued activity with the SEC is it provides an opportunity, it empowers you, but also you being a CISO, you being all the way down the food chain, because it gives you this opportunity to point out, say, well, we don't want to be these guys. Look at these guys, look at their 8K, look at their other, who wants to be SolarWinds? Gosh, nobody wants to, do that. And it's like, oh, or let's look at Meridian Link. Let's look at something going, hey, we need to speed up some of our assessments of this. That budget that you set aside, yeah, gosh, look what happened when MGM's, stock, look at what happened at their losses. Gosh, I'd hate to suffer those losses. So can we move this up the priority? Can we do this? It gives you something else to mention when you're pushing for this. So not only did you get the budget, but it's like, hey, we really need to ensure that our vendors are doing this, or this is doing this. And it gives you someone else to point to and blame, rather than being, yeah, no, it's just hard. I mean, math is hard, security is hard, and I'm just not going to turn on that. It's like, oh, well, gosh, if we don't turn that on, look what's going to happen. And it kind of gives you that extra little argument, arrow in your quiver.
And investing in cybersecurity companies, a lot of times getting the product into a company is the first big step, because then you get that PO and then you get the money. That's great. But if it's shelfware, it's not helping anybody either. And so from a point of view, if you're having trouble deploying the security apparatus that you have architected, this, again, could help be your velvet hammer to make sure that you're hitting that and say, okay, well, sign off that you have pushed this back 3 months on your CIO, on your COO, whoever's impeding that. Because, again, you want to make sure you document that it's not that your intent is to not reach or meet the expected reasonableness of security, but there's a lot of different ways and things that you don't control that are in your way.
So if it's outside of your control and something happens and suddenly you're getting a phone call or an email or a request to come in, I mean, Danette, who pays for my lawyer? Because I'm not the company. I'm not, and we have different interests right now because I'm going to be thrown under the bus. I mean, I'm the chief information sacrificial officer, or I'm their deputy. So I'm going to be sacrificed on an altar of greed or whatever. Who's going to pay for my lawyer? Because I don't know that my salary is going to cover that, and it's not. So when you're going in, and also Danette's firm, I'm sure, is available to be hired, who's going to pay your bill?
Hopefully you've negotiated insurance coverage. I hope so.
And if not, hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, and so working that into both the insurance coverage, ask when you're coming in, get that
Insist.
added. Also, you can get individual coverage through your homeowner, stuff like that. Like, make sure you're protected, because just as in any situation, you just don't know how it's going to go. You need to have someone looking out for you that has your interest, because it can get expensive.
So I see that we actually have quite a line of questions. Should we?
Should we? I don't know. Should we add some spice? All right, let's go. Let's start over here.
I'm curious how often audio from conference calls like Zoom or Teams shows up as evidence in an SEC.
So the question, too, is how often does audio So we not only have the Slack message, they're written, but how often does audio from either presentations, conference calls, or other things
On
end up?
Zoom or Teams?
That's a good question. As soon as the pandemic hit, I started including an instruction in all of the subpoenas I was sending out that companies must produce audio and recordings of Zoom calls, Teams calls, things like that. As a practical matter, no one produced those. I don't know that the SEC is getting a lot of audio in its document productions. They're asking, but whether companies
And the
are
more
really producing.
sophisticated they get, they will be asking more, and then it'll probably be written in there, you must record board meetings, and to that end. So it could get a lot more prescriptive, that you need to keep an eye on that.
So just be aware that when you roll your eyes out loud at commentary, just know the audience, you may end up seeing and reading about it. But
All right, great. You want to go over on this side?
yeah, we'll go on this side.
Hey, so it's an interesting point you just made. As a CISO, one of the things you have to foster is a community around security, right? And some of that requires more honest conversation than you would have in front of a subpoena. So what is y'all's vision on that, right? If every Slack message, if every WebEx message, if every piece of information, especially working from home, right? The whole idea of water cooler conversation is it's out of bands almost, right? It can't be subpoenaed. But if people are working from home and all they have are these tools, how do you balance building a community that can have honest conversation or sarcastic communication or any other kind of communication that would look adverse in front of a judge? What is y'all's view on that? How do you balance that? How do you find that balance in a work from home world?
There's a phone. There's an audio. If the audio is not recorded, you cannot produce it. And just being aware and kind of cognizant of if your note to your colleague after you've just left a conversation, a deposition, and you've been sitting down with Danette in her former role, maybe don't tell your colleague in writing, well, I just lied.
Sure, that's fair. I think those.
No,
So just-
this is an absolute issue. This absolutely is, because culture is integral to a organization, specifically in what we do, because we have a lot of trust, we have a lot of banter, we have a lot of, ways that we slice and dice somebody up other than their resume and their certifications. So there is a lot, and that's how you really do press into somebody and say, hey, what do you think of such and such, and how they banter back and whatever, and then that's building trust and it's building culture, and it really is important. So that's why one of the reasons that a lot of companies are recognizing they do want people to come back into the office, and it does make remote work very difficult. Like when we had Tenable, we would bring people in, all hands. We would encourage that face-to-face for that exact reason, because we understood that the culture is more than just block tackling and doing your work. And so it's going to be really difficult. So challenging you to figure out how best to do that. And maybe it's not always Signal or a place that you can say things that go away. Not always, but there's other ways around that. But you're absolutely right. And the other thing is you don't want to create a culture of snitching, from a standpoint of like.
Snitches get stitches.
Exactly. If anybody watches Y-Files from that standpoint, snitches get stitches. But it is a big balance, because whereas they're actually giving you a good gift of transparency from the SEC is giving you a good gift of transparency so you can see into other things. The financial industry has, and if you talk to any CFO or any bookkeeper or whatever, they have to recognize everything in a very specific way, because they know a third party is going to come on top of that and look. So everything you do, you need to implement and do things with an eye on there's going to be a third party coming in and looking at that. But the benefit there is you now have the transparency to look into somebody else's 8K and to see what they're doing. So it's a threat feed that was not always there. So it's going to be a bumpy ride. But, when it's a dumpster fire, don't put an incendiary device in the dumpster that you know is potentially going to explode when that dumpster gets on fire, right? So if you can try to avoid some of those things, the dumpster fire is inevitable. How are you going to deal with it? S'mores? Are you going to make it,
Always s'mores.
you know, pour more gas on the fire, or are you going to try to contain it and make it less? So try to look at it a little bit more that way, in a positive way, but you're absolutely right. Companies are going to be struggling with bringing that culture with the eye that everything that they do is going to be under scrutiny.
Yeah, and I would just add a few things, because you guys said some really important points
Just
right
get
there.
that mic real close.
Depending on the industry you're in, you might have enhanced record-keeping obligations under SEC rules, right? So if you're a broker-dealer, for instance, yeah, you're going to have certain record-keeping obligations that other industries do not necessarily have under SEC rules, and you have to be really careful that you're not putting your communications in some kind of platform that your company or your firm is not retaining and must retain under SEC rules. Because, you know, I don't know if anybody has heard about this, but the SEC in the past couple of years has fined the broker-dealers and investment advisors a lot of money for having employees communicate on what's called off-channel platforms. So they're texting each other on personal devices, and it's not being caught up by the firm's record-keeping platform. And that's something that people have to be careful of and you want to avoid. But I think it's important for companies to really think about retraining everybody on email etiquette and, you know, text messaging etiquette and things like that. You thought we all learned this lesson after Enron, but it became a bigger issue more recently, especially because of the pandemic and the rise in remote work, which is still here. And so, you know, sarcasm really, I can't say it enough, it just doesn't play well. Jokes don't play well.
Wow,
you know,
really?
Yeah, they really do. But, you know, we saw it, and I'll give a sort of old example, but after the 2008 financial crisis, the one Goldman Sachs employee who was prosecuted for selling, you know, toxic assets, Fabtor, one of his emails, the SEC highlighted in the complaint against him, and he was not high up on the food chain. You know, he wasn't a C-level guy at Goldman, but I think one of his emails said something to the effect of, you know, here I am sitting at the airport selling this stuff to widows and orphans. Oh, you know, and the SEC made a big deal out of that and said, look, this
Yeah.
is intentional.
So we know you're all funny, but, you know, we might want to keep that on the down low sometimes.
So no sarcasm about the SEC not filing their 8K within 4 days of when they have.
So
Right,
that's funny
right.
because I challenged that as well. Are we going to see the
Come on, good
results
for
of
the
the
goose, good for the
SEC?
gander, but that wasn't the primary point, but I figured the sarcasm in anyway. But a question about Covington. So Danette, I know the interesting thing with Covington, for those who caught it as it went by on the slide, SEC was, I understand, trying to compel them to say who are your clients and things like that. But my understanding was it also included non-public companies, which from their perspective said, we don't have a dog in this fight. We are not subject to SEC regulations, et cetera. So why was Covington taken to the mat asking about information for non-public companies?
Yeah, I don't have all the facts here, right? But I mean, you could, I think you could, you know, envision all kinds of scenarios why the SEC might be interested. Conceivably, some of those non-public companies would have information that could be relevant to public companies. Maybe some of them are, you know, sensitive. There you go.
Repeat that.
Non-public companies that.
Repeat that.
Right. They're non-public companies, as the person in the audience said, that trade public debt. So there are all kinds of scenarios we could think about, I think, why it might be relevant to the SEC, that being one of them.
So do you want to keep rolling with questions? Or you
I was going to say, we're going to have to slightly move, so we're running out of time. Thank you to everyone coming. We will absolutely catch questions out in the hall. Come talk to us, and I don't know, parting 2 seconds.
So again, I was having conversations, and one of the reasons I absolutely adore and love this industry is because of the passion and the capability and where you guys have all grown up from flying the airplane while we're building it. So what you have to have an idea of is now we have, and no offense at all, we have lawyers who have had professionalized training and process and moving through the market to understand what they're going to be at the end of their career, whereas we've been figuring it out and just kind of now landing on cyber as the word that we all use. So they're trying to professionalize where we've come from where we've come from is a very unprofessionalized area. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. It shouldn't be a versus, it shouldn't be a them versus us. It should be, how can we all play this together? Because the passion, everybody's all trying to do the same thing, is protect investors, the public, and employees from bad actors. So, and it's about protecting your data, my data, our data. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but let's just make sure that we're working together on that.
Yeah. Danette?
Take heart. Enhanced government scrutiny might have pain in the short term, but hopefully some benefits, especially in the long term. Hopefully there'll be more attention to cybersecurity.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much. And let's get out the marshmallows and see what happens.